So, this lecture is going to cover the basics of getting started with research ideas, resources, and ethics. So, first, let's think about why do we need ethical standards in psychological research? There are many ethical concerns in psychological research, and I'm sure you can think of ways that research can be dangerous in and of itself. So, we have to answer the following questions. How are variables manipulated? How are variables measured? How are participants recruited? So, do we have any coercion issues? Data must be stored and analyzed anonymously. Findings must be reported with confidentiality. But how do these ethics limit the kind of studies that can be conducted? It's important that the methods we are using are ethical and participants are at minimal risk, and we have a way of assuring that before the participant even walks into a study. So, there are some historical examples of what we would consider harmful research. So, researchers in the past may have held different ideas about the ethical treatments of participants in studies. So, the Tuskegee syphilis study is a very popular example. So, these participants were downright disrespected. They had no chance to make an informed decision about participating, and in the end, they were harmed. They were given syphilis without consent. It's literally probably the most cruel thing you can think to happen to participants in a research study. Now, in terms of balancing ethics and benefits to society, we have things like the Milgram obedience studies. So, participants were instructed to administer electric shock to learning when they made a mistake. And 65 participants obeyed these instructions. So, was this study actually ethical? Were the participants exposed to more harm than is ethically justified by research? In the end, participants of this study reported being stressed out for weeks after being told to administer electric shock to other participants. And they were never told the true nature of the experiment, which was that no one was actually receiving an electric shock. It was just the illusion of an electric shock. So, were the benefits of the knowledge gained from this study actually worth the risk? Well, this is where the core ethical principles of psychological research come into play. So, these are outlined by the Belmont Report and ethical systems for researchers in the United States. These tend to vary country to country, but overall, the core ethical principles of research are the same. And in the United States, the three main principles that we focus on are the respect for persons, beneficence and maleficence, that's a difficult word to say even for me, and justice. So, first we have respect for people's rights and dignity, and you can find this information in Table 2.2. So, respect the dignity and worth of all people and the right of individuals to privacy, confidentiality, and self determination. We have beneficence and maleficence. Maybe by the end of this lecture, I'll be able to say that word correctly. Psychologists should strive to benefit those with whom they work and take care not to do harm, as stated in APA 2010. So, this applies to participants and society. Our major goals here are maximizing benefits and minimizing harm. Now, justice is pretty self explanatory, but again, there's more information in Table 2.2. The benefits of psychological research should be made available to all persons. So, is it okay to practice outside of one's competence? So, APA has 5 general principles and standards for research. In addition to the 3 principles for research ethics outlined by the Belmont Report, we have fidelity and responsibility and integrity. So, standards of research, and they're outlined on how to protect our participants and how to adhere to ethics in the publication process. So, psychologists should behave in a trustworthy manner. Psychologists should adhere to ethical codes and not exploit people. And how you conduct yourself, train others, and evaluate colleagues should also be in a manner of fidelity and responsibility. And with integrity, psychologists should very simply be honest and truthful and not engage in fraud in recruiting participants, in conducting your research, or in publishing findings. Now let's talk a little bit more about the ethical standards in research. So, what is the Institutional Review Board and what do they do? They're a pretty big part of psychological research. So, we have the IRB, or the Institutional Review Board, to determine if we have met the guidelines of safety and risk in our study. Every study has to obtain IRB approval before anyone can actually participate. So, this is an independent, diverse committee of faculty and community members, and they review research proposals to ensure compliance with the federal ethical regulations for human subjects. So, for example, all of the SONA studies that you see or participate in have been approved by the IRB and have a specific IRB approval number associated with them. And submitting a proposal to the IRB is no joke. You have to provide almost a mini journal article justifying and explaining every single little step that you will do. They will ask for additions, adjustments, changes, and request several rounds of revisions before actually approving your study. But the IRB ensures that when you participate in a study, you are at absolute minimal risk and you are participating under ethical circumstances. So, what do we say when we talk about risk and ethics? Now, minimal risk just means that the researchers have ensured you will suffer no physical or emotional risk more so than you would in daily life. All of these rules and regulations derive from people being put at risk during research studies back in the day. Zimbardo and Milgram both conducted studies in which participants underwent physical and emotional harm while participating. And there's actual Netflix specials and movies on Zimbardo if you're interested. I'm not sure how accurate all of the information is, but it's that type of research that led to the creation of the IRB. So let's talk a little bit about an informed consent. So before you ever participate in a study, you'll be presented with an informed consent. So people have the right to make a voluntary, informed decision about whether to participate or not before the actual study begins. Now, this document has everything you need to know about the study, including your voluntary right to participate. So you can quit at any time, even if you'll be under minimal risk. There's a sense of confidentiality. And what it does is explain the study, what will be done to maintain your confidentiality, explain the risk and benefits, and you should be given a copy of this form, either physically or electronically. So if you've ever participated in a research study, you should have filled out an informed consent. And I'd be curious to know if you actually read through that informed consent, or if it was something you just kind of glanced over and signed. Now, psychologists do occasionally use deception. And why is it used? Can you think of ways that deception in research may be beneficial? Well, deception in ethics. So this goes back to intentionally withholding information from potential participants about the true nature of the study. So we'll give people a general description of the study without giving them the specific hypotheses that we're testing. So why do we use deception at all? Well, informing subjects at the beginning of the actual research study might affect their responses. So let's go back and look at our bystander effect example from an earlier lecture. If we told people, hey, the researcher who is passing out is just faking and we're timing you to see how long it takes for you to ask for help, wouldn't that completely screw up our study? And would we really obtain true results? So this is where another important facet of psychological research comes into play, debriefing. Now this happens after the data is collected and you've participated in the study. So this is when you convey the true nature of a study to participants after the data is collected. So this gives the perceptions of the research experience. It minimizes our adverse effects on participants so they understand what they were doing and why. And you ask the participants not to reveal the study's true nature to reduce contamination effects across participants. So, in my own research, we must extensively debrief participants because they're provided with false information about vaccinations. So, in our study, we have participants read correct and incorrect information about vaccinations, for example, that they're harmful and that they're helpful. So, at the end of the study, we have to go back and explain, hey, the information that you read saying that vaccinations were harmful is completely incorrect. It was part of our research study, and we need you to understand that vaccines are helpful and they are something that you should trust. Now, the last thing that we're going to touch about in this mini lecture are special populations. So, there are also some special populations that we worry about in research. So, first, children. We need consent from parents and assent from children. So, this is where a parent agrees that their child can participate in the research, but would never force a child to participate in something that they didn't want to participate in. We also have animals. Animals can't advocate for themselves, right? So there's APA guidelines for the ethical conduct in the care and use of animals. So the research must be justified. People have to undergo specialized training to work with animals. There should only be pain when it's absolutely necessary, and the procedure should be done with an effort to minimize discomfort. So these are very, very specific regulations for working with animals in research. All right, so that was our mini lecture on ethical concerns and risk and benefits in research. So if you have any questions about anything that we went over in today's lecture, feel free to reach out.